Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And Kishore from Tested.
Kishore, our senior science correspondent, actually, he's the one here that's been testing the new Nexus 6P.
I am the only Android user left here at Tested.
Oh no, I'm so ashamed. So I used to do all our Android phone reviews. I have since last fall switched over to the iPhone 6s Plus. Liking it, returning the iPhone, but that means I've been using far fewer Android phones. But we wanted to still give you an opinion on the 6P, and which you've been using for a little bit now.
Yeah, this is not my first Nexus phone either. I've had the 1, 4, 5, and now the 6P. So this is my fourth in the line of Nexi.
Now, you skipped the 6, and I also skipped the 6 last year. Nexus phones, of course, are Google's line of their premier Android phone line. This is what they use to launch every one of their Android iterated operating systems. This one's for Marshmallow. And the 6 was made by Motorola, a bigger version of the Moto X 2014. It was also really difficult to buy. They didn't have a lot of them.
And it was also not really well received for the people that did buy them. Good reviews on battery life. Outside of that, not so great on everything from the OS to the camera.
And it's also expensive. They charge it full price. I think it's fair to say the last great Android Nexus phone was probably the Nexus 5.
Nexus 5, probably my favorite phone that I ever owned up until today.
Wow. So in the current Nexus lineup, there are two phones. There's the 5X and the 6P. 6P is the higher end one.
Yeah, P is for phablet. I know P is actually for premium, but this is a full-on phablet phone. We're talking 5.7 inch. It's a massive phone.
Yeah, let's look at the hardware for a second. It's made by, so they went with two manufacturers this time. This one, the higher end one, made by Huawei.
Yeah, so the LG makes the 5X, but Huawei makes the 6P, and the 6P and the 5X really look pretty different. They both have aluminum unibodies, which is the first time that the Nexus line has really gone full bore on the aluminum body. And it looks, I think, really great, but
yeah, aluminum. Yeah, I'm just tapping it.
The one noticeable feature about the 6P is this black bar on top, and it is one that is met with some consternation. So lay the phone flat.
Right. And you lay it like that.
You can see the black bar, but turn it over. So the idea behind this and what the Google designer said is that the black bar actually helps with stability. Now it lays flat on the ground. But that's, I think, not the real trick here. The real trick here is that with the aluminum body, the big problem that you have is all the antennas have a hard time getting through it. And when you're thinking about NFC for Android Pay, Bluetooth, and wireless, they needed a sort of a view out. So they have this glass bar through where all of that components come through, and it really shines through when we talk about when we get to the fingerprint sensor in Android Pay.
Aesthetically, I mean, we've seen these in the Apple phones as well, where you know the Apple 6s and the 6 phones have these lines here. This is all kind of spun off of, and at least people were educated about it through the AntennaGate controversy with the iPhone 4. You can build a phone made out of aluminum and metal, but you still need those plastic parts where the signals can get through.
It's still aluminum and it's metal. You have a hard time getting through it.
And frankly, I think on the iPhone design, this bar here makes it look cheap. On the 6P, while it's not symmetrical vertically, and the bulge is much less pronounced than a lot of people think.
I thought it was going to be really bothersome in my pocket that I could feel it. I can't, hardly at all. I've gotten used to it really quick. I thought it might be a weak point for the phone, but it is Gorilla Glass on that little bar. It's pretty sturdy there, and I haven't had any problems with bending, so get over Bendgate as 6P users.
And then, of course, the bars do extend, the antenna bars do extend around the side here and the top here. It's pretty traditional places for modern phone design. You have your buttons on the side, and that's power button right here on the side, as well as volume. No button, that's a SIM card slot on the side there. And then the bottom, USB-C.
USB-C, a big changeover, and something I was a little bit worried about when I first purchased a 6P, because I've grown up on Android devices. Everything in my household has micro USB pretty much now. So switching over to USB-C was a little bit of a concern. But here's what came with the Nexus phone on the USB-C. It came with a really short, this is only about 1.5 foot, USB-A to C cable, and then a really long, with a power brick, C to C cable.
Huh. So the power brick itself has C at the stump. Okay, we've seen that before on other things, but okay, C to C, useful.
So I was initially thinking, oh great, I'm gonna have to buy a bunch of devices. I signed up for Project Fi later, which we'll get to, and they sent another charging cable with it. So all of a sudden I had 2 A to C cables, and then I just bought a 2-pack on Amazon for about $10, and all of my sort of cable worries were sort of solved. I got a couple of adapters to go from micro USB over to USB-C, no problem at all. The idea here with the C, I mean, this is the real value here. Reversible.
Yeah.
Finally.
I know. We
Hallelujah.
saw with the OnePlus 2 phone. There are other devices, obviously the MacBook Air, 12-inch 12-inch MacBook has it now. A bunch of the Chromebook has it now. Chromebook Pixel, and you know, I think it's moving along. It's expected now. I'm not that surprised. I think, you know,
this is the wave of the future for Android. So I think get used to USB-C. It wasn't that big of a deal. Let's get in the meat of the hardware, though.
Yeah, you said P is for phablet, and I know while people may squirm at the word, it means it's a really big phone, and it's a 5.7-inch phone, which actually is bigger than your iPhone equivalent.
In terms of its actual, like if you take the entire phone size, they're only about a millimeter difference in total size, but the big difference is the screen, sort of available screen space. And you can see it's a little bit bigger, 5.7 versus 5.5 on the iPhone 6 Plus. And it uses that edge to edge for sure. Now, in terms of practice, in terms of the software, I don't feel like that extra 0.2 inches has really made a huge difference to me, looking at video between the two. But in terms of overall size, it's the same as the 6 Plus. This is the first phone that I had to switch from my front pocket to my back pocket, which is the biggest shift in terms of, I think, most male users for sure.
Yeah, it does not pass the famous front pocket test. May I put it in my front pocket?
The Norm Chan skinny jean test.
Oh no! Yeah, that's bulky. You know, it's not that thick either.
It is thin.
The thing I'm most surprised about is that the bulge at the top is not as pronounced as even the renders, which typically hide any of the size differences.
I think this sort of smoothing that goes up into it makes it look more pronounced than it actually is.
Now, there's also a button in the back, or not really a button, but a sensor.
It's not really a button. It is the fingerprint sensor. And I think this is probably one of the biggest changes that we're going to see on the Android phone. So hopefully Norm's fingerprint couldn't unlock it, but mine did. I think we should talk about the placement first and foremost. So normally on the iPhone 6 Plus, we see this on the home button. Actually, a lot of phones have it on the home button. This is on the back. And so this is how I normally handle the phone, with the power button on the side, my finger going there to sort of turn off. And now I just have to switch my index finger to the back. My fingers are pretty small. My hand is a little bit slender. It was an easy shift for me. And then I mapped multiple fingers. So both my right index finger and my left index finger are both mapped. So when I'm in the car and I'm driving, I can easily use my right hand to unlock the phone as well, too.
Now, it doesn't pass my new test, which is the chicken wing test.
What's the chicken wing test?
No, you might be excited about this, Kishore. You love chicken wings.
I do.
Now, how many fingerprints can you put on this phone?
I've only mapped 2, but I think you can get up to 4 on there.
Okay. So I've used the Galaxy S6, which had a fingerprint sensor on the front. And what they want to illustrate is the speed at which it unlocks. So I'm going to put my finger in the back, and it's actually vibrating very quietly, so not detecting. And then we'll do yours as well.
Oh, wait. I missed it.
There it goes, unlocked. And then we'll show you the iPhone, which is, I have to press it, and it unlocks. Now, one of the reasons I actually like the fingerprint sensor in the front is that I can lay it on a table, and it's off. And if I'm eating chicken wings, I can use my pinky.
Nice.
And unlock it. Maybe it's there it goes. And use my pinky and unlock it. The chicken wing test.
So I have a very different utilization of my phone where I very rarely lay it onto a flat table unlocked. So I usually pick it up and hold it in my hand, in which case I found it being on the back was being really useful to how I was normally handling the phone to begin with.
We also should note that the fingerprint sensor and capability is now built into Android Marshmallow.
Absolutely. So this is probably one of the biggest shifts going from Lollipop to Marshmallow. It's integrated with all sorts of features like Android Pay. I think one of the things that are coming up is going to be opening it to third-party apps. So what I'm really excited about is there's been some announcements, not here yet, that we can see it utilized for 1Password. And that sort of third-party validation is what I'm really excited about for the fingerprint sensor. But in terms of its experience, it's worked well. Just like so many other phones, including the iPhone, It indicates that if you map it, it learns continually over time as you keep unlocking your phone, and it gets better and better. It's roughly been my experience. It's gotten slowly better over time, but it was great right out of the box. I'd say the only times I've had problems with the fingerprint sensor is if my finger's been wet, or if I misplace my finger, like I put like a little quarter of the finger on there.
Yeah, the kind of extra feature, it showcases the new version of Android. But the premium aspects aren't just for the fit and finish, it's also for the interiors as well, the hardware that's inside. So inside here, you have the latest, basically from 2015, your latest quad-core processor from Qualcomm.
It's the Snapdragon 810, so it's technically an octa-core, but it's really 2 quad cores. One that's a 2.5 gigahertz, or actually a 2 gigahertz, and then a 1.55 gigahertz. The idea is the 1.5 gigahertz actually operates a little bit more power efficiently, so it's going to manage your sort of power consumption in a more interesting way. I haven't had problems with the processor. I know people weren't a fan of the Snapdragon 810 because it overheats. I haven't had that problem yet. It's still a complaint. They keep upgrading the firmware. We're at up to 2.1. I think it's sort of an issue that, I think a lot of users wanted the 820. It just wasn't ready yet when the 6P was ready to come out.
Built alongside that processor, there's also your Adreno 430 graphics processor. You have 3 gigs of RAM. So it's really high-end specs.
It is. I mean, I think you can quibble that the 3 gigs RAM, you're going to see a lot of 4 gig phones and a lot of other flagship phones. I've barely gotten above like 1.8 on the RAM. One of the big features now is that you can actually see RAM usage inside the native in Marshmallow, which is a new feature. So you can just check your memory usage overall.
1.8 gigs.
And there's a better sort of interface for checking battery life as well, which is, I think, really useful here. And gives you, everything from just sort of predictive, how long it's going to take until your battery's gone. We'll get to battery in a second, though. But I found the RAM more than plenty. Even when I bang on it, I haven't gotten above 2 gigs on the RAM.
Now, we've been showing you the phone and the display. It is a 5.7-inch screen with Gorilla Glass. It's a 2560 by 1440 display, which is kind of your standard high-end QHD display these days. No word about whether Google has any plans to use that for any type of VR headset. Maybe we'll find out later this year. But it definitely has the same pixel density, high enough pixel density as the other phones.
Yeah, at above 500 pixel density, I think it looks great. Video looks great on it. No complaints about the overall view. I have to say it's an AMOLED screen. So that has pros and cons with it. I think you're going to see a lot of contrast, a lot of color saturation with this phone. I think the only complaint I really have about the display is that you see a lot of oversaturation in points. So you can see like colors really pop, and when you're taking certain pictures, I think that can be problematic at points.
And also AMOLED means that they can selectively light up certain pixels, like Motorola has done for a long time. What did this flip phone do in terms of the ambient information?
So the ambient is actually a complaint about the displays, is that it does have ambient light detection, but I think a lot of users have complained that it's not very quick to translate that ambient information, and that's really about Marshmallow itself, as opposed to the 6P. And translating that information to dim or brighten as needed, it works. It's just not as fast as you'll see in other phones, particularly some of the Samsung line.
Okay. On the back, of course, camera. If you're going to buy a high-end phone and spend a full price for it, you want top-of-line camera. I mean, I may not have 500 PPI on the iPhone, but I really like its camera with optical image stabilization. I know you don't have that here. How did you like the photos and video?
Well, camera's been the biggest knock on the Nexus line to begin with, that the camera just hasn't matched up to any of the other flagship phones. This is the first time that we've really gotten to the place where we're getting close. We have a 12 megapixel front camera, 12 megapixel back, 8 megapixel front. It uses a Sony sensor. It gets down to about 1.5 microns, 2.0 aperture, pretty close to what you see in the Apple, in the iPhone 6 Plus. What I really love about this camera is that it really looks better in low light situations than any other Nexus phone before. And that's been a huge adjustment from times in the past. You can still quibble about the camera app. The camera app in Marshmallow, not that great. There are a couple features that I think we should talk about really quickly. It has this smart burst feature where if you hold down the button, it takes 8 shots at once. and it can stitch them together into a GIF, but it's not that great. But the Smart Burst is a great way to get a good shot out of a quick, simple use, and the utilization is really simple by just holding down the camera button. I will say, no optical image stabilization, which is a big downside here. It has electronic image stabilization, which is okay, but it's all software based.
And it matters most for video, of course. If you're shooting 4K video, I mean, you can crop in and do some stabilization afterward, but you're gonna feel the hand jitter if you're trying to follow someone.
Yeah, so I still think that's the place the camera really falls down compared to the 6 Plus and other flagship phones. But the camera's such a huge improvement over what we've seen in Nexus phones in the past, then now we're talking about a camera that's at least comparable to the other flagship devices.
Yeah, I mean, the low light performance, a lot of that has to do with that f2.0 lens aperture, and then also the 1.5 micron pixel size on the sensor.
But it all doesn't matter unless you have enough power to get you through the day.
That's right. So you have no overheating, but what's the battery life like?
So it has a pretty beefy battery in here, 3,450 milliamp hour battery, which is pretty beefy compared to most phones, but you can't just talk about battery in the context of capacity. You have to talk about it in real life utilization. So my screen on time has varied between 4 and 5 hours. I've gotten over 5 hours a couple times, which is pretty great.
And that's not 5 hours just like in the day. Screen on time, meaning that's how much you're actually using it.
In terms of real life, I get through the day pretty easily.
Okay.
And then the USB-C is a quick charge, so I'm getting up to 40% in about 40 minutes, and then about 90 minutes to full charge.
Now you're saying it's a quick charge though, but it's not as fast as, for example, the Samsung with the Qualcomm charging.
It's not as fast as the Qualcomm charging, but it is native to USB-C, so we're going to see similar quick charging in devices going forward across a bevy of lines. But specifically to the battery, I think the optimization within Marshmallow to the display on this phone is not perfected yet. You can definitely see that the battery utilization when the screen is on isn't quite perfected yet, but Marshmallow does one amazing thing. It has a new feature called doze.
Okay.
So let's doze.
Let's demonstrate it.
So last night I went to bed. I shut off my phone. I didn't charge it because it was already at 97% and just left it there. And I woke up the next morning about 8 hours later. What do you think my charge was at?
90%.
95.
Wow.
So Marshmallow has a feature where it essentially puts a phone in deep sleep, and it has almost no utilization of the battery while it's essentially in this deep sleep mode.
But does it actually, does it pull, for mail? Do you get notifications? None of that stuff?
It's not sending me notifications while it's in this sort of deep sleep mode. I mean, it will send you like notifications that you tell it to allow through still. But that kind of battery conservation is incredible. And I think that's something we haven't seen. And it's great that it's going to be integrated directly into Marshmallow. And that's really the feature here that's made the biggest difference in terms of the battery life.
So is that a toggle, or is it time-based, or just
it's native in there? You can turn it off, but it is essentially, it's right there. You don't have to turn it on by default.
If you're wearing your watch, will you still get notifications?
I do get notifications still on the watch, and I just went to the Urbane watch when I got this phone, and I still got notifications, but honestly, most of the times I've really tested doze, I've been asleep.
Yeah.
So I'm not wearing my watch, and I don't want those items to come through.
Right. Oh, awesome. Okay. What about other features of Marshmallow that really stand out on the 6P?
So in terms of the actual OS, there's not a huge difference going from Lollipop to Marshmallow as it was going from KitKat to Lollipop, which is a pretty big change. So in terms of like the features, in terms of the home screen and sort of the utilization, you see a pretty similar interface. The RAM interface, the battery interface is new, but the one that I really want to highlight is something called Google Now on Tap.
Yeah.
And you're
Google
a fan
Now,
of Google Now.
I love Google Now. I mean, I know it's on iOS, but it's not native. Like, I want OK Google. Sorry, I think it performs so much better than searching with Siri on the iPhone. So, but new Google Now on Tap actually now taps into other apps.
So essentially, it's using the power of Google Now directly with an item native just onto the screen. So I have a word here written, Infinity Gauntlet, on my screen. If I just hold down the home button, it does kind of a deep search, and it does the Google Now search, and it gives me access to Google links, the images. I can even go to a YouTube cut of the Infinity Gauntlet series. So it's this, I think, an incredibly useful feature, especially in text messages when somebody says, meet me at X restaurant. I can just do Google Now on Tap, gives me the map information. It gives me location. I can even call the thing natively in there. I think it was an excellent software upgrade. In terms of overall utility, I don't use it very often, but I like that as an added feature overall.
And the app developers need to incorporate it. Obviously, that Notes application, Google made that so they could integrate it. But with music applications, you can have more functionality to search artists. I like it more than, I mean, just on its face, sounds more useful than Apple's the peek and pop when you're highlighting a link or highlighting a map
I think
address.
it's natural to compare it to 3D Touch, and it's not the same thing overall. But in terms of its utilization and usefulness, I think it is definitely in that line right now. I think 3D Touch has the potential to pass that in a pretty great way, and the 6P will never be capable of that because it's not the screen's not built that way. But I think it's a really good answer to what 3D Touch has opened up.
Well, fortunately for Android fans, Apple's kind of dropped the ball, and Apple app developers have dropped the ball in integrating 3D Touch on many of those apps. They're really just not there. Nexus phones, that also means you can use some Google exclusive services. And one really interesting service that you're using is Project Fi.
And this is probably the primary reason I bought the phone. So I had T-Mobile before I got the 6P, and I was reasonably dissatisfied with my T-Mobile service. And Google announced a project last year called Project Fi, where they've become their own provider of wireless technology, or wireless service. And what they did is they partnered with T-Mobile and Sprint to deliver a access to data, but the idea behind the project was really simple. Was we wanted to deliver cellular content, but you wanted to do it in a way that you would pay for the data you use, and that's it.
Right.
And so the way Project Fi works is it has its own app, and it essentially prioritizes utilizing Wi-Fi when available, but then will switch between T-Mobile and Sprint networks in terms of availability. You pay $20 for your basic services, your phone, unlimited text, all of that stuff. And then you pay $10 per gig thereafter. And what I found is I was normally using about 1.8 to 2.7 gigs per month on T-Mobile. My first month on Project Fi was at 1.3. And I had
Wi-Fi compensated for the rest of that.
Absolutely. And so I had a big credit that came back. I only paid $13 for my data service that month compared to $30, which is what I was normally paying on T-Mobile for my data. That's a pretty big difference in price. And if my usage patterns stay the same, I'll probably save upwards of about $100, $150 this year just by switching to pay-as-you-go. Now, there's a couple big caveats here, and I think a couple important things. So Google, with Project Fi, has integrated a couple key features. One is that it can auto-connect to open wireless networks and use Google VPN to securely transmit data across from that. And I think one question I had about that is how quick is that process going to be?
Yep.
So I drove from my house over here to test it this morning, and I saw how many times I connected to open wireless networks. 6 times over about 5 miles, and it was pretty seamless in terms of my interactions with it. The problem you get is if it connects to an open wireless network that requires sign-in. It can't handle that.
Like an airport.
Like an airport, exactly. Second caveat, I have Comcast as my home network provider, so I have access to their mobile hotspots. So Xfinity Wi-Fi, especially in dense urban areas, was here in San Francisco, very available. So I hit all those networks and it easily sort of connects to them. Now, if you don't live in a dense area that has lots of open Wi-Fi that you don't have this sort of Comcast connection to.
But your logins save.
My logins save, so it can constantly do it. If you don't have that, I don't know how much utility that sort of feature is within Project Fi. But in the first month, this is rough because it's hard to calculate this. I estimated about 100 to 200 megabytes saving in data usage just from that feature alone.
And you're paying a lower rate than you would. You still get your phone, you still get your text, and you're using only as you go, essentially as you go.
But the biggest thing that really impacted it, now that I'm paying for data, I'm much more mindful of when I use data. And so I think there's a bigger behavior change in my utilization of just pure data. Like I wouldn't download podcasts when I'm just driving around. And that probably saved me more data than anything else. So of the 500 megabytes I probably saved in this month, I would say half of it came from just me not downloading stuff.
Does that give you anxiety? Are you data anxious?
I'm not data anxious because I wasn't a heavy data user to begin with. But if you're a heavy data user, this might not be for you. I mean, especially if you're on a legacy unlimited plan of some sort, I don't know if Project Fi is for you. But if you're in this sort of like 1 to 2 gigabyte arena, you're paying $50 a month, it could amount to savings. I also like it because now I'm paying basically the same price. And instead of having T-Mobile, now I have T-Mobile and Sprint. So in terms of my connectivity, it's better.
You got more colored balls. That's right. They're more numerous and bigger.
It does prioritize Wi-Fi calling, which has bitten me once in the last month in terms of making a Wi-Fi call on a weaker network and that call not really working out in terms of the quality as if it was just on the cellular network. But overall, it's been great. And I have to say, the customer service on Project Fi is great. The app being able to tell you what your data usage is, and then native and Marshmallow telling you what your data usage is by app. So you can make a pretty big difference there.
Very cool. I mean, in the history of Nexus phones, we talk about the Nexus 4, which was a older processor or didn't have 4G LTE. The Nexus 5, which had actually pretty crappy battery life, was lightweight. I like that part. And Nexus 6, which was full price, expensive,
$650 when it came out.
And some other problems. Do you feel like this is the first Nexus phone, in your opinion, that actually doesn't have all the shortcomings?
So its retail was $500, and at $500, I paused a little bit. There was a little bit of me that was like, I want to pull the trigger, but I can't. And over the holiday break, they put it on sale for $50 left. And at $450, I felt like I got really good value. And then when I got my hands on the phone, I felt like the kind of sacrifices I made for this phone versus other flagship phones, maybe a gig of RAM, maybe some minor situations with the camera.
No replaceable battery, no expandable storage.
But I got a 32 gig model, which is plenty for me. You can easily buy the 64 and 128 models. I felt like those trade-offs for $450 versus those other flagship phones, which are in the $600-$700 region, I felt like I'm getting really good value at $450 for this phone.
Yeah.
Now, list is $500, but it has been on sale many times for $450.
All right, and you've been happy with it so far. Well, thank you so much, Kishore, for coming in and sharing with us your experience with the Nexus 6P from Huawei, and you pronounced it correctly. And like we'll say, Huawei.
I actually didn't say it in this review, but I'll say Huawei, just to be correct.
There we go. And we'll have more reviews, Android phones and otherwise, on Tested, of course. You can find Kishore online on our podcast every week. You're at Science Quiche. I'm at Nchan, and we are at Tested.com, both on Twitter and on YouTube. Subscribe to our video, like our video, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.